Let them praises give Jehovah. They were made at his command. Them forever he established. His decree shall ever stand. From the earth, oh, praise Jehovah. All ye floods, ye dragons all. Fire and hail and snow and vapors, stormy winds that hear him call. Let them praises give Jehovah, for his name alone is high. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted, far above the earth and sky.
There's always look for the good in every situation, and that's always a thing. Well, we're going to be winding up, closing out lesson 11 today, and then going into lesson 12. And I'm making my way back here because I don't want Pam to have to walk. And I know we won't get to this until later in the hour, but you'll have it when we get there. You know, in 60 A.D., in Roman Asia, as well as the rest of the Roman Empire, slavery was just a fact of life. And there were very many different kinds of slaves. There were economic slaves, most of them. They were Roman citizens for the most part, but not all. Some of them were of the professions. The Romans didn't have any respect for the professions except for the military and politics. So all the other professions, accountants, doctors, lawyers, they kind of an outgrowth of politicians they tolerated. But scribes really started out as slaves and became freedmen when they were proved to be valuable enough to a family that the family rewarded them by making them freedmen. But learn a little something about Luke. He was a physician, but he was not a high-level Roman citizen. He was a freedman. He was someone who had been a slave and had been made free. Which is just interesting because you can see the faults in, the faulty thinking that goes into that kind of an attitude toward the professions, because that meant they didn't have anybody who really was that loyal to Rome when most of the dire situations of life came up. We're going to talk about this more from the standpoint of employees and employers today. But I think first we need to just deal briefly with Christianity and slavery. Why would that be an issue?
Well, if you use religion as a tool to free slaves, it would be a problem. Plus, in groups of people in the New Testament times, you had slaves, you had masters, you had government officials,
Well, why would slavery be a problem to the church today?
One reason is because as a church, we're all part of one body as opposed to massive gaps between
Mm-hmm.
and so forth.
And sometimes, I'm thinking here more as an apologist, I guess, than anything else. But people who are agnostic or who are wanting to attack Christianity for one reason or another often point to slavery in the South and to things that were taught in some churches about slaves being obedient and so forth. And they try to blame the church for slavery. Well, God had nothing to do with slavery. It came about because of the hardness of people's hearts. And you got to realize that slaves, in the Old Testament at least, and in the Roman Empire, there was a whole spectrum of how they were treated. You had people who had been born into service in a family who were valued members of the family. Almost all child care was in the hands of slaves. So the pedagogue was one of the examples that Paul uses in Galatians to talk about the role of the law in bringing Christianity. As you had all of that, all the way down to the political slaves who were at the very bottom end of the spectrum, who really were treated horribly in Roman times. There's more of a problem in Corinth than in Ephesus, but it was a problem in both cities because those were people who had been captured in warfare, who had been sentenced to be slaves by a court or something, and they were literally the worked to death was the point. Well, there were some of those that were Christians, particularly in Corinth. We know some of them were Christians, and that led to some problems in the church there that had to be dealt with. Today, we look at this almost like it doesn't apply to us. We're not slaves. At least most of us don't feel like slaves most of the time. Although there are times I've wondered if I wasn't. You wonder about this. You get any problems with trying to find if that applies to you, go to work for a church. But how do we take this section of chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, and how do we apply that to our lives today? Okay, Bob?
I may be getting ahead of you a little bit, but you can add to and back on here. But I think we need to be careful about how we change the wording of how the Bible is written. However, the word used here today, as you just said, is apply in our society today. So with a few changes, we can make it apply. And I certainly believe it applies to all of us. We've all been either employees or employees. So do you mind if I read those verses?
No.
The way that it would apply to us best. Employees, obey your earthly employers with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey him not only to win their favor when their eyes on you, but like slaves of Christ, or we should say employees of Christ, serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not only because you know the Lord will reward every favoritism with him. So if we use those terms, it means the slave and the master part applies to us in every way.
I think you take this passage and you match it up with 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And, you know, and we find that we're going to find ourselves, we're going to find Christians in a whole variety of levels and roles of society. A lot depends on where you are. Like I said, we don't have the practice of slavery outside of the human trafficking and so forth that takes place, puts people into this sex workers status in this country. But if you weren't trying to establish a church in Malaysia, you're going to find that some of the people who are attracted to Christianity live in conditions about equivalent to being in slavery. So we have to learn to deal with that and to treat everyone as a Christian. Once Christ said that we were to love our neighbors as ourselves, slavery was going to go away. It just took some time. But you cannot love someone as yourself and treat them as the way slaves in the South were treated many years ago. We can all do like what Bob just read for us and apply the principles to our lives today, because we are all either employees or employers. And many of us have been both at the same time. That's kind of interesting too. So it's with respect and concern for the spiritual welfare of everyone that we are supposed to behave. Because it's not our boss, it's not us that we're ultimately working for. It's for Jesus Christ. And for the example that we set in this world that establishes whether people want to be like us or drawn to the group we're a part of, or whether they are repelled and want to be something altogether different. There's a lot more we could say about this. I just don't know if it would speak to any of the situations we're in right now. We could talk about the bonded servants who were slaves who decided they wanted to stay as a part of a family. Certainly happened in the Hebrew times, and it on up into the times of the Romans. Someone who decided that their welfare, their best interest was in being a member of the family of, and pledged themselves for the rest of their life to be loyal to that family. They still had an ultimate master. Their ultimate master was God. And if you read the book of Philemon, and not just skip over it like we tend to do because it's short, you know, it couldn't be much as really important there. Well, you're going to find there was a whole lot going on in the church back then that can apply to our relationships today. I'll leave that for you to read on your own, and we'll talk about it sometime if you want to.
In my going over things in the past, I'm not basically a section that was in the record reporting that this person was in good health so they could indenture themselves to someone else. Now, in the years past, many times people that came from Europe to America indentured themselves to get the money from over here. And it generally was for 6 years, 5 years, 7 years, something like that. And so that's a type of slavery that we forget. But there was that kind of thing.
There was that kind of thing, and it always has been.
Okay, one other thing. The medical profession historically has been opposed to socialized medicine. Okay? Why is that? Well, we have a granddaughter who's working in the clinic over in Waxahachie, but she is an employee of Baylor Hospital System. Okay. Which comes first? Your responsibility to your patient or your responsibility to your boss? I mean,
I think that is a very real problem
that is an issue.
that we are not facing today, because people who get out of medical school today usually come out of school, unless they happen to be from a wealthy family or just be one of the really lucky ones that managed to land a scholarship, they come out owing $150,000 in student loans, and then they are not able to raise the capital to establish an independent practice. So they, in essence, have to sell themselves to a hospital or to a clinic and then you've got the divided loyalty. And, it makes for some interesting choices sometimes. I don't consider the physician who's over my care my doctor. I really think of the nurse practitioner because he's more likely someone I can see. The doctor is only there a day and a half a week. So unless I happen to get sick on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, forget it. Till I depended on him. So we need to bring this up when we get down to verse 12 in the passage we're going to be looking at today. There are some issues that we face day by day that we don't even recognize as being issues that definitely impact our spiritual welfare. But Paul comes to the end of his lesson here. And in verse 10 of Ephesians 6, we see the word finally. Well, as a preacher, you learn not to use that word in a sermon. Because when you say finally, everybody starts gathering their Bible and putting their songbooks up and getting ready to go and wondering what they're going to have for lunch. When Paul said that, that isn't what it meant. He meant, okay, you've heard what I had to say. Now, from now on in your life, here's what you need to do. And what follows is his way of explaining being faithful as a Christian. Now, and we're starting in number 12, lesson 12 here, if you're trying to keep up with where we are. When you think of the Christian life, as a walk, then what would you use to be the metaphor to represent remaining faithful? Standing upright, standing firmly. It was a very important military tactic in this day and age. What had Rome done to the rest of the world? They conquered it. And who did they conquer it with? Their foot soldiers. Now, they had cavalry that were mounted that used long spears. They had archers that were like the artillery, and they had artillery. They had catapults and devices of that nature. But the troops that were really feared, the troops that went in and conquered an area and occupied it and maintained rule, was the Roman foot soldier. And they were ubiquitous. That means everywhere. The people in Roman Asia didn't have to wonder, they didn't need a flannel graph to know what the armor of a Roman soldier looked like or what it was composed of, because when they went to the marketplace, there were Roman soldiers standing on every corner. When they went to the courthouse or to any of the public buildings, there were Roman soldiers. And that was true all over the Roman Empire, but particularly in Roman Asia, because they were trying to be more Roman than Rome. And so he goes into this object lesson of what it means or what it's going to take to remain faithful as a Christian. So he gets down to verse 10, and he starts with one sentence. Actually, it's not a sentence in Paul's discourse. It's an introductory phrase, because he doesn't believe in periods. He just keeps on going. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. So, what does that mean for you? Their strength comes from the Lord, but is it automatic?
No, you've got to put it on.
You've got to accept it. You've got to seek it. But the strength and might that it takes to remain faithful, in spite of all the problems that the world can bring to you, has to come from the Lord. You don't have it. I don't have it. Jim doesn't have it. Nobody has it. Only the Lord has it. But what do we have in Christ Jesus? Go back to chapter 1. And what do we have? He lists 7 of them, but he really is talking about more than those 7, as we explained back then. What do we have? Spiritual blessings. We have the strength and the might to be able to resist temptation and trials, problems in our life. Okay, we're going to come to verse 11 here, or the latter part of verse 10, and then on into 11, down through verse 18, I think it is. Yeah. Down through verse 17. And he lays out the object lesson. let's read that object lesson from a couple of different translations. Bill, you have the NIV.
No, I have the,
What do you have?
it's the living.
Okay, we'll take that one, but I want it second. Who has you have the NIV, Bob? All right, let's read that first in the NIV. Then let's read it in the New Living, and let's make some applications to our life. Okay. The end of 10, where he starts out, put on, down through verse 17.
Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand firmly with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, and the breastplate of righteousness in faith, and with your feet fitted with the message that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God.
Okay, Bill.
Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities in the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so that you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then after the battle, you will still be standing firm. Stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth and the body armor of God's righteousness. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that you will be fully prepared. In addition to all of these, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. Put on salvation as your helmet, and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God.
All right. Let's talk about how this applies to us. We've talked about most of A there. Let's go back and re-emphasize where the strength, where this armor that we're talking about, that Paul's talking about putting on. That's an object lesson for us to take. And by the way, I know you've probably taught it with all the flannel graph, and you have, and anybody else that's taught Sunday school, or maybe you had the plastic things that look kind of toy-like. You could buy the actual Roman armor. I looked into that back about 1999, and the price back then was about $3,000 for the full set, so we didn't buy that. But each piece represents something the Christian does that allows God to strengthen you so that when the battle of this life comes, you will be able to stand. All right, let's look at verse 12 right now. because it's very important, if you're going to fight a fight, to know who your enemy is. That's why football coaches spend hours and hours looking at films and videos. That's why boxers watch videos and films of their opponent. Because you're looking to see what are the characteristics of the enemy. I don't think we've done this as a church. I don't think we've looked at who our enemies really are. It's Satan. Satan. He's the enemy. So we get this cartoonish picture of Satan. A little red cartoon with horns and a tail and holding a little trident in his hand. And we're never going to encounter that person. But what is our sister Judy Sanders facing? What's she facing today? Sorrow because of an enemy who attacked her grandson and took his life. We need to see that is an enemy. You're holding in your hand a phone. Has a lot of things on it. There's more computing power in that phone in your hand than was used to send men to the moon. Truthfully, it just has advanced that much. And so we can do that many wonderful things. Bob can go out to plant a crop and be assured that his planter is going to put the seed exactly where it's supposed to go because of what? Technology, a computer, satellites, all of it working together. But what else goes on?
The rain, the temperature.
Well, no, I'm talking about technology, and I'm talking about we've got to recognize that the forces we face are right here, and they have names, and we know what they are, and we play with them and fool with them and work with them every single day of our lives. And we don't think of them as being something that can become Satan's agent, Satan's strategy to lead us astray. When he says, your version really stressed the word strategy. NIV says, what? Just a minute, Sam. Let's get this. Verse 12. The rulers against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness. So, we can run away from it. We can declare television and boy, we love to do that in olden days of the church. I've seen sermon outlines of old about the evils of the automobile and you name it. Each of those could be a source of evil because each of them brings what? Something that we can do by ourselves that can be either good or bad. We can use a search engine to find facts and documents that pertain to what we're studying. Or we can use it to find what will appeal to our evil desires. Who makes that decision? Individually, Each one of us. All right. How do you stand against that? It can be our government. It can be economic forces. Sam?
Don't you think, though, that there's a lot of demonic entities and things like that that, are in control of a lot of things and possess people and stuff like that?
Do I think there are evil spirits in the world? Yeah. I've met some of them. Do I think they can force me to do evil against my will? No.
Maybe not us, but
I mean, yes, they can influence others. But I've also read Revelations chapter 12. And what happened that's told about in Revelation chapter 12. Somebody gets thrown into a pit, which is symbolic of Satan's power being limited. And what was it that limited Satan's power? What was it that defeated Satan? Well, the sacrifice of Jesus. The resurrection was the proof that his power had been broken. So yes, that exists. But no, it is not in control. It cannot make anybody do anything against their will. It works very much like hypnosis. I once saw a man hypnotize a 90-pound high school senior. Sweet young lady. Placed her between two chairs so that her middle was unsupported, and a 175-pound man stood on her stomach, and she didn't move. She didn't feel pain because it was totally against her power. Her power was hypnotized, was harnessed by that force of hypnotism. All right, the same girl in the same demonstration was given a knife and told to stab her classmate who was beside her. Same hypnosis. Guess what? She wouldn't do it. Even under that strong of an influence, we cannot be made to do anything that is against our will. If it's against what we believe and we choose to resist it, even when our brain is under the most supreme form of control, we won't do it.
Well, what about all these people that do that stuff?
What about them, Sam? They don't have the strength of Christ and the Holy Spirit helping them, but they also make a choice. Bill?
Mental illness is an illness.
It is an illness.
Okay? When our Scott committed suicide, it was because of that illness.
It is. And you cannot take that out of the equation.
Yes.
Because it changes what the human will is willing to do.
That goes back to illness.
Yeah.
What, as a physician, I battled illness all of my professional life. That was why I was there. Okay? And there, Robert Stockton is in the hospital,
of illness.
Okay, he doesn't want to be there. He has very little control on why it happened, you know. But let's remember that some of these things in life we have no moral control over.
Okay.
We do.
That I'm not talking about.
Yeah, I understand, but there is that issue.
There is that issue, and we must never, ever try to do by browbeating someone or shaking a Bible at them what can't be done because it's no longer their will that's operational. Addiction is an illness. It is an illness. And once a person is thoroughly addicted, they are going to behave as an addict not because they choose to, but because they cannot choose otherwise. How do we treat that as the church? How do we treat that as a nation, as a society? That's one of the things we have to face today, and that isn't one of the things we're trying to find a solution to. It's one of the things we're sticking our head in the sand and ignoring.
Okay, in regard to that, there are triggers. There are triggers that are involved with bipolar illness. There are triggers that are involved with addictions. And so those people can, when they are shown that they are bad to them, can avoid those triggers.
Yes. And in the beginning, one of the things we're going to have to face is that in things that are choices, not things that we can't help, things that are in our DNA and things we don't have a choice about, that when we make a choice and we become ill, that has to be treated differently than if it's one of those things we can't do anything about from the beginning. I see a big difference between something like bipolarism and something like addiction for some people. But guess what? There's just enough people out there that inherit the wrong set of genes that they're going to be addicts no matter what. And you got to figure as a society, what are you going to do to protect them and protect societies from them without treating them like some kind of animal or something?
Well, temptation is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Each of us has our own set of things that are tempting us. Some it's materialism, some it's sexuality, some it's power. So temptations are something that each one of us has to address.
Okay. For next week, we're going to try to round this all up. Be particularly attentive to reading verse 13 through verse 19. Read the rest of the chapter because it's going to be a challenge to get through that. But you in particular need to know what today takes the place of each of those pieces of armor. What does it mean to gird your loins with the truth? We'll talk about that next week.
Low in the grave he lay, Jesus my Savior, waiting arose with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with the saints to reign. He arose, he arose, he arose, he arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. Vainly they watch his bed, Jesus my Savior. Vainly they seal the dead, Jesus my Lord. Death cannot keep his prey, Jesus my Savior. He tore the bars away, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with the saints to reign. He arose, he arose, he arose, he arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy, I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy, I still have peace, I still have peace, after all the things we've been through. I still have peace, and I still have faith.